I am Dr. Jane Roskams, and we're here at BrainMind on the NeuroArts Day, and I'm talking with Dr. John Ngai, who's director of the NIH and US Brain Initiative. He just convened a panel that was absolutely fascinating about the interaction between the brain and art, how we perceive art, how the brain processes art. And now we're going to drill down on who John is, what he does, and how the job that he does influences both him and the world.
The world.
The world.
The world.
The world beyond your front door. So for people who obviously are not listening to the talks, a minute or two on exactly what is the Brain Initiative and why did we need it?
Yeah, so let's talk about the need, right?
Yeah.
The unmet opportunities right now. So the brain is the most powerful and energy efficient computer that's known to humankind. 86 billion nerve cells or neurons, hundreds of billions of other cell types, non-neuronal cells, and together they make trillions, if not hundreds of trillions of connections that give rise to everything about us, everything that makes us human, everything that makes us individuals different from each other but having commonalities. So what is it? How does this thing work? The human brain, given its vast complexity, which is on the order of understanding the cosmos, we don't yet have the tools to really probe this magnificent machine. Astronomers have these wonderful telescopes. We need the equivalent for understanding the neuroscience basis for everything that we do, and very importantly, for when things go wrong. So based on all that, 10 years ago, the White House announced what we now call the Brain Initiative, which is the Brain Research through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies Initiative. And our goal is to revolutionize the study of the human brain, both in health and disease, by developing better tools and resources. We need these better telescopes.
You've just mentioned 10 years, almost 10 years in.
We're 10 years in.
All right.
We're celebrating 10 years of innovation.
Got it. What would you say are the top 2 or 3 things that the Brain Initiative has managed to do that have really changed the game for how we view brain function, how we view the shape of the brain, how we view our understanding of our brain could really impact the future of our brain health?
Right, so we've accelerated the pace of discovery about how this thing we call the human brain works. We've had a chance over the last 10 years to reflect, how do we get here? What's been our successes? What's going to drive future success? And also based on a couple of mistakes along the way. One thing we've done is we have, in laying down the foundation for the future, we have launched these very large projects that we call transformative projects, which in kind of a time of conceit, we call them transformative projects. We actually branded them as such. And there's 3 of them. One is to develop a complete census or atlas of every cell type in the human brain, starting with more simple brains like in rodents and others of our closer species. That's been a spectacular success. We've actually been able to catalog them to some degree and also understand what these cells do to generate what we call the parts list. So that's been a great win. It's required a very large investment, close to $500 million and counting, but it's really going to pay off in a big way that will allow researchers to use this as a resource to really understand how these cells, neurons and other cells, interact with each other. But those are just the parts. If you think about how a computer works, what is it in your iPhone that allows you to make and receive calls in such an efficient way? You not only need to know what the components are and what the properties are, but how they connect to each other. So that comes down to what we call a wiring diagram or a connectivity map. Now, as complex as the brain is with so many different cell types, it's vastly more complex when we think about all these intricate connections they make with each other, and that's the goal of this connectivity project. And right now we don't yet have the tools to do this for an entire mammalian brain, but we're going to develop them over the next 3 to 4 years and then scale up to get a complete wiring diagram, first of a mouse brain, and then eventually of a human brain. Now, this is a huge challenge, not just experimentally, but also in terms of data science. And here we are planning on having necessity being the mother of invention to drive the new data science technologies. So if we think about a high resolution map of an entire mouse brain, one mouse brain would occupy 1 exabyte of data. So how big is an exabyte? So Jane, you're kind of thinking, I'm thinking.
It's a lot of data.
It's 1,000 petabytes, which is 1,000 terabytes. So think about your laptop computer. 1 million of those is what it would take just to store the data, never mind to try to understand, interpret, and to make it usable for the broader research community. That's the second big project. The third transformative project is one to gain access to cell types. We call it the armamentarium. Why do we use the word armamentarium? We're thinking a big toolkit to be able to access these very specific cell types that we've identified in these other studies and their connections, to start probing how they work in these circuits that receive information and drive behavior. So these are 3 big projects. The 4th big project, which just come online, is to develop better ways of measuring behavior, including human behavior, and to sync that up with these electrical activities that's going on in our brains to understand the causal basis of behavior, both in health as well as how things go wrong in disease. So that's one big area, right, that has 3 or 4 different subsets of it. So you say, John, well, that's all fine and well. It's going to take you years, if not another decade, to have all this come to fruition. True, to lay the foundation. But today, we are actually impacting human health with these remarkable ways of doing neuromodulation. Right now, the big workhorse has been deep brain stimulation, which has been used for decades in Parkinson's disease, and now it's being applied to other kinds of disorders like intractable depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, binge eating disorder, traumatic brain injury, recovery of motor function from stroke. It's been actually an amazing ride. The last couple of years, we've seen an inflection, and using our technologies, which involve better ways of imaging brains, so we know exactly where to stimulate, but really importantly, ways of measuring brain activity that correspond to mood states, and that activity, those activity patterns are being interpreted by some really cutting-edge, bleeding-edge AI algorithms to tell us, to give us these, what we call activity biomarkers, and then to be able to stimulate patients or individuals into a state that's much more conducive to having a full life. So we're very excited about that. Well, how are we accomplishing all that? So the third big pillar of what we're doing is we're changing the way we're doing science. We're having people approach science not in a siloed or narrow disciplinary way, but to have folks come in from not just neuroscience and biology, molecular biology, cell biology, but also the physical sciences, mathematics, psychology, the engineering sciences. And this has really kind of given rise to new fields at the interfaces of traditionally held disciplines, and it's really driving the new way to do things. And we're also leveraging larger teams, where these brilliant scientists and engineers come together, and they don't compete with each other. They work together, and they find the reward is the fruits of their labor. So we're very excited about this new way of doing science that's enabling discovery to come much, much faster.
Awesome. So I'm going to leap ahead a little bit, because you just touched on this.
How many of your questions
going to be more towards the end? So
right.
We saw in this morning's introduction, right? We've got connections, we've got synapses, we've got collections of genes and all these various different cell types that you were referring to a little while ago. They're all changing in time and space as you're zooming out and imaging a whole brain in action.
Right.
This is going to take an enormous effort to bring it all together to be able to understand, like, the fourth dimension, the time and space piece. Where do you see AI making the biggest impact on that? Will AI solve the brain, or will AI be a piece of what we will absolutely need to bring a lot of those various modalities together?
So the short answer is yes. The short answer is yes. We are generating data at an amazing clip. And up until recently, that did instill quite a bit of fear in me, and I'm still a little bit concerned about how we're going to manage that. From different points of view, there's just, well, where are you going to put it? Brain Initiative has figured out a way to store it, but that's not enough. It needs to be accessible, it needs to be reusable, it needs to be interoperable. So, for example, in many of the studies that we're just starting to launch now, we want to be able to compare and synchronize data we have from behavioral measures, whether it's eye tracking, indicators of stress from sweat or cortisol in the sweat, movements and what have you. How do you integrate across these modalities? And the amount of data we're going to generate is going to be the technical term is going to be ginormous.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Again, coming back to just the connectivity project, just one mouse brain, never mind a bunch of mouse brains, one mouse brain, a static map is one exabyte. There are very few exabyte data sets out there that people know how to handle. So again, this will be the mother of invention. We will need to invent better tools, better AI approaches to be able to understand what are the underlying patterns that reflect reality. Right? So the amazing thing about AI is that it can actually help us find what we call these latent patterns that are not visible or detectable to the casual observation. That's important. But on the other hand, what you need is ground truth information, because you can make up a model of anything, but what does it have to do with reality? And one of the driving principles behind the BRAIN Initiative is to kind of embed theory, data science together with experiment so they can mutually reinforce each other in an iterative and generative way. But the other piece of this is it's not just using AI as a tool, but actually understanding how the brain works can give us better ways of better design, futuristic algorithms that can, again, process this information. So, we can learn a lot from how the brain works. Again, it's not only the most powerful computer we know, it's the most energy efficient. And if we think about all the AI that's come online in the last couple of years, we should also think about how much energy that's consuming. And if we don't figure out how to do this in a more energy efficient way, we're going to burn ourselves up.
Yeah.
So it's this wonderful, generative, mutually reinforcing process. We often talk about translation and reverse translation, and it's going to be a very exciting time.
Awesome. So you just touched on the whole idea of patterns and pattern recognition, and these are things that machine learning and AI will be essential in. So I'm shifting gears a tiny little bit, because you're right in the middle of this. And you're orchestrating this entire team and all these various different projects. But you've been recognizing patterns for a long time, and here we are in a Neuroarts Day.
Yes.
Going from your earlier work looking at patterns in convoluted turbinates in the olfactory system.
She's getting very technical for us.
Of receptors going on and off and brilliant colors, to looking through the lens of your camera. And I'm one of the few people here who knows that you do that a lot.
When I have time.
And you produce amazing art
Thank you.
Your own. So how has your view on science and the brain influenced your photography, and vice versa?
That's a great question. It's a question I actually had an opportunity to consider during the pandemic. For me, and for you, why are we drawn to science? It's the act of discovery. So in many ways, one can think of the act of discovery as revealing the unknown, revealing the non-obvious. So when we think about the genre of photography, or any of the arts, really, you can think about different extremes. There's documentarian. There's basically reproducing in a documentary way so somebody can understand the facts or the actual cold, bare reality of what happened. But there's, of course, more to art than that, right? There's actually, can we reveal the non-obvious? So to me, as a scientist, I'm constantly searching on a good day for a non-obvious answer to kind of a tricky question. And I think all artists are similarly looking to reveal the non-obvious. And that to me is actually, when I think about art, is far more challenging than in science, because I've seen and I've also had my own work critique. That's kind of nice, John, but I think I've seen that before. Right. And so it's a challenge to be creative, to be original.
Truly unique.
And I think these are qualities that I'm going to say both scientists and artists need, but I think they're actually not such different breeds. Art and science are two sides of the same coin. They both require creativity. They both require imagination.
A different way of looking at things.
Different way of looking at things, and searching for the non-obvious.
I guess the final question to wrap up with is, you're here at this day for BrainMind, and we're going to be spending the next couple of days talking about brain-computer interfaces and the kind of things you were talking about earlier. Are there ways in which you think the BrainMind community can influence what's happening in the Brain Initiative?
Absolutely. So the Brain Initiative, it's a bit of a juggernaut. You know, we're a large enterprise. We're funding some amazing science. You know, we funded, I think, over 1,600 projects, you know, over multiple continents. We're just one part of the ecosystem. The whole scientific enterprise requires creators, scientists, engineers from all over, all different walks of life, but it also requires different ways of supporting it. You know, we can only provide so much. An ecosystem thrives because there are different players working in concert and mutually reinforcing each other. So in addition to federal funding, which is the bedrock of biomedical science as we know it today, but it also requires other contributions at the local and state level, philanthropy, commercial enterprises. It's not going to work unless all these pieces come together.
And this is one of the places they come together.
And this is one of the places where all these pieces, all these players in the ecosystem are being convened to think about how to creatively develop ways to better approach these very pressing issues.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much for being here and being part of this ecosystem.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, BrainMind.